Hello, my crafty friends. Welcome. Today I'm going to be creating with Simon Says Stamps May card kit. This one is called Dandelion Messages, and I'm going to do a quick unboxing. I've had this kit on my desk for about a week now, and it's the first chance I've had to sit down and play with this. And I had so much fun with this beautiful kit. So you always get a lollipop. You get a $5 off coupon from Simon Says Stamp. Some glitter glitz gel. This is the neon yellow. This one looks really fun to play with. I have the pink, but I'm happy to have the yellow. This little packet of goodies has two beautiful Tim Holtz buttons in it. And I do end up using one of these on the front of my card. And a die, a dandelion die. I used that a lot too to create these 5 cards. You get 3 envelopes in very pretty colors. Next up is an embossing folder. This is from Sizzix and it's called Dandelion Wish. And this is the most beautiful pack of pattern paper. It's 8 by 8 and it's from Creative Expressions and it's called Dandelion Dreams. These are such lovely patterns. I had a lot of fun using these on my card fronts. And I have a lot left over. You get a sheet of metallic cardstock, and it has the craft on the back, which I love because it's easier to glue onto your cards when it has the craft on the back instead of the metallic. This set is called Dandelion Messages, and it's a 6 by 8 clear stamp set. As always, they give you an example page, some lovely cards that they've created with this kit, and this will tell you everything that's inside the kit. And then you get some cardstock. You get 110-pound solar white. This is lavender, lemon chiffon, and cornflower. On card number 1, I'm going to use a piece of the cornflower cardstock. I'm using some anti-static powder first. I'm going to stamp out this beautiful cluster of dandelions from this stamp set. There are so many beautiful sentiments in this set, and a lot of them are perfect to go on the insides of your cards. So I'm going to stamp this out in the corner. This is one of those cards that kind of evolves as I work on it. I had something else in mind, but it changed a lot as I created this card. I'll ink up this stamp with some Versamark ink. This is a nice sticky ink. And I do this a couple of times. And then I'm going to pour over some white embossing powder. I allowed my heat tool to warm up before I brought it to the paper. Now I can melt this embossing powder, and it turns such a bright, pretty white. I kind of take my time when I'm melting the embossing powder so that I don't warp the panel. But here it is all done. I'm going to stamp out the 2 heart stamps from this set. And I'll stamp the big one and the little one, and then I'm going to stamp the little one more time with, again, Versamark ink. This time I'm going to use some Ranger Pink Peony embossing powder. It's just a lovely pink color. And it stands out really well on the colored cardstocks. I'll pour this over. Look how cute that looks up in the corner. Now I can melt the hearts. And then I'm going to be doing a bit of ink blending on this panel. I'm starting out with tumbled glass, and I'm using a cloud stencil. This doesn't show up very well on the cornflower cardstock. I thought it would be a little more brighter, but it's very subtle. I'll speed this up, but it looks kind of pretty, but it does kind of fade back as it dries. So after this, I am going to pull out some unicorn white pigment ink and just go over my work. The Distress Oxides can kind of dull your embossed images, so I bring in a tissue and just kind of buff off the ink. And it just makes them bright white once again. So this is where I decide to brighten it up with some white pigment ink. And I'll just show you a little bit of this because I'm sure you get the idea of what I'm doing here. But I like this a lot better. And so I'll go down the whole panel again this way, kind of matching up the clouds, which wasn't very hard to do with this stencil. And now that the panel is all done, I thought it looked just a little dull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it out with a small rectangle. This is a faux stitched die. Just cut out a panel from this larger panel. I'll tape this down and run it through my die cut machine. And here it is all cut out. I went ahead and stamped the small sentiment that says "with sympathy." And I'm going to match this with a piece of pink cardstock. This is just from my stash. And I'll center this first onto the white card base. I put some foam adhesive behind my cornflower blue cardstock panel. Then I can center this on the pink. And then I thought it needed just a little bit more to it. So I'm going to add a ribbon at the bottom. This is very thin, double-sided adhesive. I'll put a strip of this at the bottom, just under the sentiment. And I do trim off the edges. And then I can peel off the release paper. And I have some really thin white ribbon. And I'm going to put a strip of this at the bottom. And then I can trim that down. I also cut out some of the metallic cardstock using the Dandelion die. And this die is so much fun. It cuts out the cutest little dandelion. And I'm just going to stick that over the white ones. And then I used a micro dot behind this bow, and I'm attaching that at the bottom of the dandelion. And that's all there is to this card. I love how it turned out, but it evolved into something I wasn't planning on. Now on to card number 2. I'm going to use some of the beautiful pattern paper. This one is very subtle. But I'm going to do some ink blending over this panel. Just at first I thought it was just going to be a little bit of ink blending. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but this time the ink blending just got away from me and I pretty much ended up covering this whole piece of pattern paper with Distress Oxide inks. I was having a hard time getting a smooth blend, so I kept adding color and going up the panel because I wanted it to fade out. And it was just so blotchy that I brought in some spun sugar and I put this at the top of the panel. So it's pretty much completely covered by the Distress Oxide ink, but it does turn out really pretty. I love these two colors together. My salvaged patina Distress Oxide ink, and I also got it in the regular Distress ink. It just arrived and I wanted to use it. It's so pretty. I've seen other crafters using this. And I love this color. It's one of my favorites now. So I stamped the sentiment up at the top. And this says Summer Dreaming. And then I'm going to stamp a few of the single dandelion stamps and just kind of put them in a little trio at the bottom. They just curve around each other so perfectly. And then I can pick these up with the door of the Misty. And this time I'm going to be stamping them with some black VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I neglected to use my anti-static powder first. And the ink is still kind of wet, the salvage patina and the spun sugar. So I do run into a little bit of a problem when I pour over the clear embossing powder. However, since it is clear embossing powder, it wasn't too bad. I was able to take a dry paintbrush and brush some of it off. I'll go ahead and melt this. And I was a little worried about it really curling the paper, but it did all right. But I think that looks just lovely over these inks. I'm using a Trinity Stamps Slimline die set. This is the mini slimline, I should say. And I'm going to cut out this scalloped panel from the lavender cardstock. This is going to go behind my stamped panel. And then I'm just going to attach this to a white card base. I do end up cutting down my main panel just a little bit. And I'll attach this to the scalloped panel. The last thing I'm going to do with this card is add a few clear confetti pieces across it. This will just add a little touch of sparkle. So it's a very simple card, but it's just pretty to look at. I love the colors. I'm also using one of my new heart sequin trays. I love these little things. I 3D print them. This is the newest color in my Etsy shop. And here's a close-up look at the finished card. On card number 3, I'm going to be using the lemon chiffon cardstock and some acorn VersaFine Clair ink. This is another great ink to emboss with, and I like the light brown color. Well, I guess it's more of a medium brown. But this turns out to be kind of a masculine card. I love the stems on these dandelions, and I wanted to include them to make it kind of a striped pattern across this panel. So I stamped out a bunch of single flowers, and I'm going to flip it upside down. I'll put a piece of acetate on top so that I don't get my yellow cardstock dirty. And then I could just position these easily and move them around to where I want them. I'm just using the dandelions that have the straight stems on them. This way, I don't have to clean my stamps before I use them again and position them on the card. And then I can just clean off this acetate when I'm done and reuse it. Now I can pick these up with the door of the MISTI and pull off the acetate and ink them up. I'm going to use the little hearts again. So I'll stamp a few of the small hearts first. I really like the shape of these hearts. I'm just going to stamp them all over this panel. This is kind of a background stamped panel, which is one of my favorite techniques to do. And now that I'm done with all of the small hearts, I'm going to switch it out for the larger heart. I'm not going to be pouring any embossing powder over this panel. It's just as is. But once I'm done with the stamping, I am going to cut it down just a little bit with one of my wonky stitched rectangle dies. And here it is all cut out. I also cut out a piece of metallic cardstock to be 5.5 by 4.25. I cut out the middle piece so that I wouldn't waste it. And then I'm going to attach my lemon chiffon onto the metallic cardstock with some dot liner. I just wanted it to be matted by this metallic cardstock. Now I can attach this to a top folding white card base. And I'll just put a little more dot liner on the edge of the metallic cardstock. I want my tallest dandelions to be along the bottom of the card. Now I can just stack those together and press it in place. So here is the button. I went ahead and used my wire snips to cut off the back of it. It was just two-dimensional, and I'll show you how I did it here. Just snipped off so easily with the wire cutters. It flipped, and I don't have any idea where it is, and I probably will never find it, but it just was cut so easily. I was surprised. So that's what I did with my brown button. This is a word die from my stash. It just says hello, and I cut it out with more of the metallic cardstock, and I cut out the shadow to this word with some vellum. I'll put some little dots of glue behind this. And then I can just attach the second piece of this word onto the vellum. I pulled in some brown ribbon. I'm going to do some tucking. It's easy to peel this up because mostly it is attached to the metallic cardstock. I'm just peeling up the bottom and I'll wrap the ribbon around it and tuck it behind. And then the dot liner will keep it in place. Then I can just press that back in place. Ribbons are always an afterthought with me. I'll add a micro dot. I know the button's going to go here, so the micro dot won't be seen behind the ribbon. And then I tied a bow, and I'm going to attach it with another micro dot. I'll just snip off the ends of this bow. And then for this beautiful button, I'm going to use lots of micro dots behind it. I used about 4 or 5. I just don't want this falling off in the mail. And then I'm going to attach this to the card right above the bow. But to me, this looks kind of like a masculine card. I'm going to attach the sentiment down flat with a little bit of liquid glue, and that's all there is to this card. But I do think this one is my favorite. That button is just too pretty. At first, I wasn't planning on using them, but when I started creating that card, it just seemed to fit perfectly. Okay, look at this beautiful patterned paper. I'm cutting this down to 3 by 6 to create another mini slimline card. And I'm not going to do any ink blending over this one. It's already done for you. I'll stamp out the sentiment, and this one says, "Missing our chats," with some Versamark ink. I'm going to heat emboss this with white embossing powder. I can melt this with the heat tool. I'm going to use a sentiment strip die to cut this out. I'll just tape it in place and then run it through my die cutting machine. And here it is all cut out. I find these strip dies so handy. I use these a lot. I went ahead and cut out several dandelions with the dandelion die, and I glued 2 together just to give them a little bit of structure and dimension. And I'm going to glue them across this panel. And again, they just curve together so pretty on the card. So I'm just putting an odd number of these down. This is a super easy card, but I love how it turned out. And now for my third dandelion. The sentiment I'm going to pop up with some foam strips. And I'm going to trim off the ends of my sentiment. I'm just holding it in place with a bit of tape. And I can flip it over and trim off the sides. I didn't want the foam strips going over the stem of the dandelion and causing a little bit of a bump. So I'm just going to put them on either side of the dandelion stem. And this is 2 foam strips side by side. So they do go really narrow, but I just needed it a little bit thicker this time for the sentiment. Now I can pull off the release paper. And place my sentiment over this dandelion. Let's add it to the white card base. And I can just stack those and press them together. These are from the Hobby Lobby shop. I saw these and I debated about getting them because they're so big. And they've been in my stash for a while, but for this card, they just worked. So I was happy to finally use these. They just matched the pattern paper very perfectly. I'm just going to put 3 along this card. And that's all I'm going to do to this card, but I love the pinks and the purples together. It's so pretty. And now on to my very last card. This one is going to involve some more of the beautiful pattern paper, and it's going to be another sympathy card. This says, "Sending you peace." I'm not going to emboss the sentiment this time, I'm just leaving it as is, but I do like to use the VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it is such a nice, dark, crisp ink. I cut out this panel using a rectangle scallop die from My Favorite Things. It cuts out the scallops separately, and I cut it out 3 more times with white cardstock, and I'm popping up the scallops, give it more dimension and structure. I find that it's easier to glue onto a card panel when it's really thick like this. That way it doesn't get misshapen when you glue it down. I'll glue this onto a white card base. And then the inside panel, I'm just going to attach flat with some dot liner. Now I can just easily press this into place. I do kind of have to tuck the sides under or to pop them in. But excuse my camera, up there to the right, I have a bit of a smear. And I didn't notice that when I was filming it, but I do put a lot of lotion on my hands. And I must have just touched the lens. I'm glad it's just on the last card, and I do apologize for that. So I'm using more of the Dandelion die cuts. These are all very simple cards today, but the pattern paper just helps you create some really fun and beautiful cards. You don't need to add a lot to this. The last thing I'm going to do is add some gemstones across this panel. And I don't know where I got these. I just had them in my stash for ages. They must have come from a kit. But they're just the perfect color to match this gold metallic cardstock. So I'll put 3 of these around the panel. And that is all there is to card number 5. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed these cards and were inspired. I sure had a lot of fun playing with this May card kit from Simon Says Stamp. All of the links will be listed in the description box below. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Take care. Bye.